was 30 years old and sitting in a law office that looked like it had been designed to drain the color out of human beings. Everything was beige: walls, carpet, furniture. Even the damn coffee mug on the table in front of me was beige, as if someone had taken the idea of neutrality and scrubbed it free of any emotion. Across from me sat a man in a navy suit, fingers steepled, eyes glazed with the boredom of someone who had watched 1,000 marriages die and didn't care for the eulogy. "Sign here," he said, pushing a thick sheaf of papers toward me with one hand while glancing at his phone with the other. He didn't even pretend to be interested in the details. "Your wife gets everything." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so completely absurd. "Everything?" I repeated, the word catching on my tongue like a piece of glass. The man didn't blink. I looked down at the line where my name was supposed to go. It was already typed out in perfect serif font. Grayson Camden. The name I'd built a life around. A life that was being disassembled, line by line, bullet point by bullet point, into something unrecognizable. She stood behind her attorney, arms folded like a queen watching a peasant trial, her expression a porcelain mask of victory. Delilah. Her name had once meant something beautiful to me, like a symphony, like trust. We'd been married almost a decade. I'd met her in college. She was laughter and ambition, clever eyes and perfect timing. We used to sit up late dreaming about homes, travel, building a future together. I worked night shifts to help her through law school. She said she'd never forget that. Apparently, she had. Her lawyer, a man named Caldwell who used to mow his lawn shirtless while chatting with us over the fence, now had a trimmed beard and a $1,000 briefcase. That briefcase might as well have been packed with daggers, each document a cut meant to bleed me out. I wasn't just losing a wife. I was losing my house, my car, my savings account, and, yes, even our golden retriever Max, whose leash I'd picked out with more excitement than my last birthday. "Is this even legal?" I asked, still not touching the pen. Not because I thought I had a real chance, but because some part of me still believed in decency. That part was stupid. "Your refusal to manage joint finances responsibly has been well documented," Caldwell said smoothly, his voice soaked in smug certainty. "Combined with the testimony from Mr. Marco Ruiz and the sworn statements regarding your emotional instability." Testimony. I cut in. "Marco? My best friend." Delilah didn't even flinch. She just adjusted a pearl earring and examined her manicure, the soft pink curve of her nails catching the sunlight like they had better things to do than destroy someone. Her eyes flicked up for just a second, met mine, and I saw it there, satisfaction. She wasn't just winning. She was savoring it. Marco. God. Of course. The signs were there, in hindsight. The sudden distance, the weekend absences, the way she laughed too hard at his jokes and stopped correcting people when they mistook them for a couple. I thought I was being paranoid. I gave them the benefit of the doubt because I believed trust was a choice. Because I loved her. Because I didn't want to become one of those bitter men who checked her phone or tracked her location. I was better than that. I was stupid. The lawyer sighed, impatient now. "Mr. Camden, if you'd like to dispute the terms, we can schedule a hearing, though I should warn you, Delilah's uncle is the presiding judge." That was the killing blow, delivered with a casual shrug, like it wasn't the most corrupt sentence I'd ever heard. I turned to Delilah again, willing her to show even a sliver of the girl I once knew. Nothing. Just that cool, glassy smirk that told me I'd been used up, squeezed dry, and now discarded like yesterday's news. I stared at the papers. Paragraphs of legal jargon. Numbers and asset allocations. "No alimony," I murmured, running my finger down the lines. "No equity from the house. She gets the business account?" "You forfeited your claim when you removed yourself from active management 3 years ago," Caldwell said. "By mutual agreement, if you recall. Because she asked me to. Because she said I needed balance. Because she cried when I said I'd keep working weekends. I gave it up because I thought love was worth that. She took it and built her firm from it. Our firm." My throat felt like sandpaper. I wanted to fight, to scream. But what good would it do? The courtroom was rigged. My allies were traitors. My dignity was on life support. "She keeps Max?" I asked softly, not even able to say the dog's name without my chest tightening. "Pets are considered shared property, but since Delilah is remaining in the marital residence." "Right," I whispered. "Of course." The pen was cheap. Plastic. The kind you'd throw in a drawer and never miss. But in that moment, it weighed as much as a gavel. My fingers hovered. I could walk out. Refuse. Drag this through appeals. Expose everything. But that would cost more than I had. And she knew it. They all knew it. I signed. Caldwell leaned forward and took the document like it was a receipt, not the cremation of my life. He checked it, nodded, and said, "We'll file immediately. You'll receive a copy once the court finalizes the dissolution." Delilah gave a polite smile, turned, and walked out without a word. No goodbye. No thank you. No regret. I sat there alone in that beige office, being still wet on the paper in front of me, feeling like a man who had just buried himself. The silence screamed louder than any argument ever could. And just like that, I was nothing. The backseat of a 2008 silver Honda Accord wasn't meant for sleep. Not really. The upholstery was stiff, the middle hump jabbed into my spine, and the faint scent of old takeout clung to the ceiling like it had made a permanent home there. But for the past week, it was all I had. My new address was the back row of a parking lot behind a 24-hour gym just off Highway 10, wedged between a busted vending machine and a dented garbage bin. I kept a sunshade across the windshield and a blanket balled up on the seat beside me. Not for warmth, mostly for illusion. To make it look like I still had some semblance of control. I'd gone from a king-sized bed with goose-down pillows to curling my knees to my chest so my feet didn't knock against the driver's seat. From brushed concrete floors and glass countertops to a dashboard held together with duct tape and prayer. And I would have taken it with some dignity if it weren't for the silence that settled in every night. That silence was louder than anything. Louder than Delilah's betrayal. Louder than Marco's lies. Louder than the court that pretended justice was blind when it was clearly wearing her uncle's spectacles. They'd frozen our joint bank accounts a week before she filed, drained them without blinking. When I asked for an explanation, when I still believed there was one, Delilah called it preventative protection. Her lawyer called it responsible fiscal separation. I called it theft, but none of that mattered. The judge ruled in her favor before I even had time to speak. Apparently, I was unfit to manage assets, a line pulled straight from Marco's statement. Marco, my best friend since college. We used to crash on each other's couches during finals. He'd helped me pick out the ring I gave Delilah. I'd been the best man at his first wedding. But when she needed a knife, he handed it to her, handle first, blade waiting for my back. I didn't even know they'd been sleeping together until I saw the photo, posted 2 days after the court hearing. Delilah, champagne in hand, Marco's arm snug around her waist. I zoomed in on her ring finger. No band, just a new bracelet I hadn't paid for. Caption, starting fresh with someone who sees me. I saw it while sitting in a diner booth, using the last bar of free Wi-Fi before my battery died. I didn't eat, just stared. My bank cards had all declined by then. She'd filed fraud claims against charges I made the month before, said I'd been irresponsibly using marital funds. The bank flagged my name. I couldn't access $1. Even Max's vet bills were now under her name, which is how I found out she'd relocated him to her sister's home. I called. No one answered. The first night in the car was denial. The second was rage. By the third, I was just trying to survive. I parked outside the gym because they didn't tow unless you caused trouble. I signed up for a week-long free trial with a fake name, Chad Williams, so I could use the showers in the early mornings. I'd roll out of the back seat at 5 a.m., neck aching, try to brush my teeth without making eye contact with anyone. I kept an old duffel bag in the trunk with 2 shirts, a pair of slacks, and a box of protein bars I'd picked up with the last cash I had. That and my laptop. The laptop. That was the only thing Delilah hadn't managed to touch. She didn't know I kept it in a locker at my old co-working space. It was a 5-year-old Lenovo with a cracked corner and fading keys, but it booted, and that was enough. I'd spend afternoons hopping from coffee shop to library to mall food court, hunting Wi-Fi and open outlets. No home, no job, but a browser full of job listings and YouTube tutorials. It started with coding videos. I'd messed with web design back in school, built some HTML pages for friends, but I never went deep. Now I had time. Now I had motivation. My fingers were slow at first, hesitant, but soon they remembered the rhythm. Syntax, logic, function. It became therapy. Some guys drink. Some guys disappear into strip clubs or casinos. I taught myself cybersecurity. It was almost poetic, learning how to defend against theft, against manipulation, against breach. Because I'd lived it. I'd been breached. I'd been gutted. Now I wanted the armor. I wanted the weapons. I wanted a skill that could never be taken from me, no matter how many signatures I put on a page. I found forums where anonymous posters shared stories like mine. Men who lost everything in courtrooms that didn't see them. Women whose partners erased their credit while smiling at brunch. People who rebuilt with nothing but time, drive, and Wi-Fi. One guy, code-named Jules, posted a thread about encrypting personal files to keep ex-partners from accessing shared drives. I messaged him. We started talking. He had a scarred past too. Literal burns. Said he used to sleep under bridges before building his first app. He sent me code to study. I sent him algorithms I'd written. We exchanged numbers. It wasn't a friendship yet, just a thread of connection, but it was more real than anything I had left in my old life. At night, I'd sit in the car, hoodie pulled tight, watching headlights blur across the wet pavement. I'd whisper Max's name just to feel like I wasn't completely alone. I missed the sound of his paws on the hardwood, the way he used to nudge my elbow when he wanted to go out. Delilah used to say he loved me more than her. She wasn't wrong. One morning, I looked at myself in the gym mirror after showering. Pale, hollow-eyed, jaw tighter than I remembered. But there was something else too. Something simmering. Not rage. Not grief. A kind of clarity. I'd already died in that office when I signed those papers. This version of me? The one standing barefoot in a borrowed towel, building a new skill out of spite and hunger? This was resurrection. I was 31 when I stepped into the offices of Virion Chain Works with a resume full of smoke and mirrors. I'd made up job titles, padded experience, and listed a fake startup that didn't even have a website, just a shell logo I designed in a mall food court. I wore a blazer 2 sizes too big, and my dress shoes still squeaked with sweat from walking 15 blocks in them. The receptionist smiled like she knew I didn't belong, but I smiled right back. Confidence is a mask that works best when you're desperate. And I was starving. The guy who interviewed me looked 12. A baby-faced CTO named Travis who said, like, every third word and had a man bun he kept adjusting like it was a dial for his intelligence. He asked a few questions I barely answered, just enough to sound fluent in code, just enough to make my GitHub profile look active. Then he said the words I needed. We're hiring junior engineers. Pay's not great. You game. I nodded before he finished the sentence. I was hired the next day. Virion was a second-tier crypto firm, trying to disrupt the digital wallet space, but drowning in bad code and worse leadership. Half the team was remote. The other half was glued to energy drinks and Reddit threads. The building smelled like burnt coffee and nerves. But it was a paycheck. Barely. $22 an hour. Enough to move out of the car and into a shared apartment with a guy named Ellis who only spoke in sports metaphors and didn't believe in plates. We ate off paper towels. But I had a mattress again. A doorknob. A socket to charge my laptop without feeling like I was stealing. I woke at 6 every morning, hit the gym, made instant oatmeal, and then locked in at the desk by 8. The company's code base was a disaster, sloppy, unprotected, full of logic gaps and duplicated functions. At first, I just fixed what was asked. Quietly. I didn't want to draw attention. I was the new guy, the cheap labor. But I started staying late. Refactoring backend systems. Leaving notes in the repo no one asked for. Fixing bugs that weren't mine. My fingers learned the architecture like a second language, like the kind of fluency born from necessity. I wasn't brilliant. I was obsessed. They noticed. Not in the way you'd hope. 6 months in, Travis called me into the break room. He had a protein shake in one hand and a guilt-ridden smile plastered across his face. Look, man, he said, not meeting my eyes. We're pivoting direction. Cutting some roles. Nothing personal. I asked him how many others were being let go. He hesitated. Just, you. The words hit harder than they should have. But I didn't flinch. Didn't ask why. Didn't try to defend the hours I'd poured into their system. The loyalty I'd forged in silence. None of it mattered. I was cheap and now replaceable. I thanked him. I actually thanked him. Because while the job was gone, the knowledge wasn't. And something had shifted in me. I no longer wanted to fit into someone else's system. I wanted to build one. I emptied what little savings I had into a prepaid card, bought server space, a new domain, and 3 ebooks on security architecture. I shut myself in my room for days, the hum of Ellis watching football in the background, and built. I coded like a man possessed. Not for a product. For a mission. You see, it wasn't just about security. It was about protection. No one protects men like me, people who get wiped out in courtrooms that speak the language of power and nepotism. No one shields individuals from the weaponized blend of litigation, manipulation, and digital exposure. I wanted to build a wall for people like me. A fortress. One that couldn't be penetrated by a jealous ex or a rigged courtroom or a charming thief who used to call you brother. And that's when I reconnected with Jules. We'd kept in touch lightly after our coding forum days, but this time I sent him a working demo. It was crude, ugly, honestly, but the concept was strong. A tool that tracked financial vulnerabilities, account anomalies, and asset risk across a personal digital footprint. It sounded paranoid. That's because it was. But Jules didn't laugh. He sent back revisions in under 12 hours. Within 3 weeks, we were coding together daily. He lived in a studio in Cincinnati, surviving off disability checks and freelance encryption gigs. His story was darker than mine. Childhood trauma. A hospital fire. But his mind was extraordinary, sharp like broken glass, and just as dangerous when honed. We worked through nights, through meals, through breakdowns. I'd wake to his code commits at 3 a.m., full of annotations and dark humor. If this line breaks, we're all doomed. LOL. We called it Blackwell Systems. The idea was simple. No one should be defenseless in the digital age. Our software encrypted emails, cloaked IPs, monitored dark web leaks, and offered immediate asset relocation tools. People who had been ghosted, robbed, blackmailed, framed. These were our clients. Our users weren't corporations. They were the collateral damage of messy marriages, broken trust, and corporate betrayal. We made $200 our first month, then $900. By month 4, a lawyer from Texas emailed us asking if we could shield a celebrity client's communications during a contentious divorce. Jules said yes before I could even blink. Our first major contract paid us $30,000. I stared at the wire transfer like it was a hallucination. Ellis came home that day to find me lying on the kitchen floor, just breathing. Blackwell wasn't a company yet. Not officially. We hadn't filed papers, hadn't rented an office, hadn't even picked a logo. But I'd never felt more sure about anything in my life. This was the thing. The line between the man I had been and the one I was becoming. Born from betrayal. Powered by paranoia. Built on a broken code base of pain. This wasn't revenge. It was resurrection in source code. And we were just getting started. By the time I turned 36, Blackwell wasn't just software, it was an institution. We had offices in New York, London, and Dubai, but even those were mostly symbolic. Our real infrastructure lived in shadows, off-grid data vaults, encrypted remote nodes, and virtual networks that left no trace. Jules and I had become ghosts, visible only when we wanted to be. We were the people you called when the bank froze your assets under false pretenses, when your ex-lover leaked your financials to the press, when your enemy made your inbox a war zone. We didn't just create firewalls. We built fortresses, steel and silence woven into every line of code. The irony? Delilah had no idea. Not until the Forbes article. They'd reached out through Sasha, my assistant, my firewall, and the only person besides Jules I trusted to speak on my behalf. They want to do a feature on the youngest CEOs in cybersecurity, she said one morning, her voice clipped, professional. You're ranked number 6. I didn't react. Not right away. Just stared at the email, the subject line glowing like a dare. Forbes 40 under 40 feature inquiry, Grayson Camden. I hadn't seen my full name in that font since my divorce papers. I agreed to the interview, reluctantly. No FaceTime. Just email responses. No photos from before 2020. They respected it, mostly because they didn't have a choice. We'd made Blackwell too valuable to ignore. Our name was on government contracts, tied to 6-figure retainer deals, whispered in courtrooms, passed like legend among the elite. Celebrities used us to cover affairs. CEOs used us to obscure acquisitions. Politicians used us to vanish the kind of emails that ruin careers. I didn't care about their sins. I only cared that we got paid to protect them. The article dropped on a Tuesday. Title: Grayson Camden, the silent architect of digital security. There was a photo, one Sasha picked. Me in a charcoal suit, standing in front of our Manhattan office with the skyline behind me. No smile, no warmth. Just eyes that had already seen the worst and built something in its wake. I didn't read the article, but Delilah did. I know because 3 days later, I got a notification that someone had searched my name at the courthouse where she once stole my life. That wasn't a coincidence. I could feel the tremor in the fabric. Like the past had finally looked up and realized I'd survived. My silence had protected me all these years. No interviews. No speaking engagements. Jules and I agreed early on we didn't need fame. We needed distance. I didn't want my name attached to press releases or podcast features. I wanted to operate in the shadows and control, untouchable. But now I'd been seen. And once people see you, they remember what they did to you. Especially when they realize you're not dead. When the article hit, Jules texted me. So, should we be worried about the ghost waking up? I replied, let them come. Because by then, we had systems in place. Layers of legal shields. Shell companies. Asset separation protocols. No one, not even Sasha, knew the full layout. If Delilah tried to sue, she'd find nothing. If she tried to shame me, she'd lose in the court of public opinion. I had something better than revenge. I had proof. Proof that I'd risen. Proof that the man she erased had rebuilt himself from shredded pay stubs and cold shower stalls. And not just into something livable, but into something unstoppable. I didn't smile for that photo because there was nothing left to smile about. I hadn't created a happy ending. I hadn't found closure or peace or whatever the self-help books said came after betrayal. What I'd found was purpose. Cold. Precise. Purpose. I didn't build Blackwell to make the world better. I built it to protect people like me, people who loved wrong and paid for it with everything. I built it to be the armor I never had. Delilah used to say I was too soft. That my problem was I expected fairness from a world that rewarded power. She used to say it like a joke, her voice low, her wine glass always half full, as if cynicism was sophistication. But power had never interested me until I had none. Until she took it. Until Marco twisted the knife and the courtroom clapped politely while I bled. Now I understood it. Power wasn't just about money. It was about insulation. Choice. Silence. Blackwell made me untouchable. But it didn't make me forget. That's why I kept the court transcript in my safe. That's why I still had Marco's text messages backed up in triplicate. That's why I kept a drive labeled, in case of cowards. It wasn't about using it. It was about knowing I could. Sometimes Sasha would ask if I ever wanted to take a break. Vacation, maybe. Go to the Maldives or rent a cabin in Switzerland. I told her no every time. Because I knew what stillness felt like when you had nothing. I wasn't ready to stop moving. Not yet. The real shift happened 2 months after the article. We landed a deal with a high-profile international law firm, Fletcher & Grange. Their clients were notoriously messy, and they needed end-to-end asset protection. The contract was worth $8 million annually. They called us essential. I called it inevitable. Jules flew in for the signing. It was the first time we met in person. He wore a turtleneck to hide some of his scars. I didn't ask. He didn't offer. But we shook hands like people who had built an empire out of ashes and coffee grounds. Later that night, we stood on the rooftop of our Manhattan office, watching the city buzz beneath us like a hive with no queen. Ever think it would go this far? He asked. No, I said. But I never thought she'd destroy me either. He nodded, thoughtful. What are you going to do if they come knocking? I didn't have to ask who he meant. I'll let them in, I said. And I'll be ready. Because the truth was, Blackwell wasn't just a company. It was a warning. A quiet, unspoken message to anyone who thought ruin was the end. It wasn't. It was the blueprint. Delilah always thought she'd land on her feet. That was her gift, confidence masquerading as inevitability. She wore it like perfume, strong enough to convince the room before she even spoke. Back then, I believed it too. She had a way of making you think the world would bend if she smiled wide enough. But charm doesn't pay debt. And confidence doesn't cut checks. By the time she turned 35, the shine had worn off. Her pearls got swapped for costume pieces. Her curated Instagram posts turned sporadic, filtered too heavily, like she was blurring out the reality beneath the gloss. From the outside, she was still the woman who won the divorce, who bled her husband dry and walked away with the dog and the dream house. But I had eyes in more places than she realized. Her boutique, the second one, went bankrupt 2 weeks before Christmas. The first had collapsed under unpaid rent and supplier lawsuits. She blamed the economy. She blamed toxic staff. Never herself. Never the reality that she didn't understand business. She understood aesthetics. The illusion of success. The applause that came with a ribbon cutting, not the months of quiet, grinding sacrifice required to keep the doors open. Her second husband, Barrett, was worse than I imagined. A gambler. Flashy teeth, fake tan, the kind of man who always had a big thing coming but never actually arrived with anything more than empty promises. I watched them from a distance. I wasn't stalking her. I was studying her. Because when people build their lives on illusion, eventually the cracks show. And Delilah's life? It was a cathedral of cards, stacked on shaky promises and trust funds that had dried up faster than she anticipated. Her father's company, the pride of the Hartwell name, was once a logistics titan. Founded by her grandfather, expanded by her father Russell, the firm had cornered the luxury supply chain market for nearly 2 decades. But Russell never adapted. He scoffed at tech, at automation, at the changing world. He kept old friends on the payroll, ignored shifting margins, leveraged everything for appearances. I knew, because I was once slated to inherit part of it. Back when I was the son-in-law. Back when I mattered. But Delilah's marriage to me had complicated things. Her father made it clear I was never their kind. The kind who inherited. The kind who wore money like skin. So he boxed me out. And when the divorce finalized, he assumed he'd erased me completely. He was wrong. Over the years, I kept quiet tabs on their books. Not illegally, just information that lived in public spaces, waiting for someone who knew how to read between the numbers. I saw the borrowing increase. The interest balloon. The real estate investments that were nothing but lost leaders dressed up in copper fixtures and rooftop lounges no one visited. I watched as the company cannibalized itself to fund image. And then, as expected, the banks came knocking. At first, they tried to bluff, refinance, beg, shift assets around like hiding cash under floorboards in a burning house. But you can only move liabilities around for so long before the weight of your bad decisions crushes the floor entirely. The first time my name showed up on their radar again was during a failed funding round. They were pitching investors for a cash injection, $30 million, to cover debt and modernize infrastructure. The pitch deck listed strategic partnerships, and one of the junior analysts dropped my name as a hypothetical contact in the cybersecurity space. Just a whisper. Just a bullet point in the appendix. Someone laughed in the meeting. Someone else said, "Didn't Delilah's ex build Blackwell?" Apparently, the silence was deafening. I didn't hear this firsthand. Sasha did. Her college roommate worked at the bank. And word travels fast when desperation meets irony. That's when the call started. First, it was a junior executive named Greg. He left 3 voicemails. Polite. Vaguely apologetic. "We think there's synergy." Then came an email from their COO, Marianne, who once told me at a gala that I had humble hands and probably wouldn't understand the burden of generational wealth. She asked for a call. I didn't answer. Then Delilah emailed. The subject line was just, "Grayson." No pleasantries. Just 5 sentences. "We're in a difficult position. I know things ended badly, but this company affects more than just us. It affects employees, families. I wouldn't be reaching out unless it mattered. Please talk to my father. He'll explain everything." No apology. No acknowledgement. Just entitlement disguised as necessity. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. Not because I wasn't interested, because I wanted them to sweat. They weren't used to waiting. They were used to people jumping. I made them sit with the silence for a full week. No reply. No callback. And when Sasha told me Delilah's mother had been spotted in the bank lobby, tears in her eyes, begging to speak with someone who understood legacy, I knew the time had come. I flew into New York. I wore a black suit, no tie. Subtle, sharp. The kind of look that says, "I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to be the last person you can afford to ignore." That morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not to fix anything. Just to look. To see what Delilah would see if she walked through the door now. Gone was the man she left in that beige office. The man who signed his name with shaking hands and walked out with nothing but air in his lungs. This man was different. Solid. Silent. Whole. And I knew, without doubt, that they were going to come crawling. I didn't have to chase. They would come to me. Because when you build your life on cards, all it takes is one gust of wind, one man with a long memory and a stronger hand, to make it all collapse. I knew they would come eventually. Desperation always finds its way to the door of the one person it once tried to bury. But even still, the sight of them, walking into my boardroom like ghosts dressed in designer clothes, struck something cold in my chest. Sasha's voice crackled through the intercom. "You've got visitors." They didn't schedule, but I figured you'd want the warning. 30 seconds later, the door opened. Russell Hartwell led the parade. He'd aged in all the wrong ways, sagging skin, neck too red for the chilled air of our Manhattan office, the tie around his thick neck a little too tight. He tried to puff himself up like he was still someone. But the sweat beneath his collar and the trembling hand adjusting his jacket told the truth. Delilah followed a step behind him, clutching a handbag that might have once cost a fortune, now worn at the corners like her composure. She wore a blazer that didn't quite fit, and her heels clicked like they had something to prove. Behind them was her mother, Evelyn, chin tilted upward, lips tight, her expression stuck somewhere between denial and entitlement. Sasha had only given me a moment to prepare, but that was all I needed. I leaned back in my chair, the skyline behind me draped in winter fog. Our office was made of glass and steel cold, clean lines. A perfect backdrop for this funeral. Russell was the first to speak. Grayson. His voice cracked once before he cleared it and tried again, deeper. Thank you for seeing us. I didn't say I would, I replied. But you're here? So, 5 minutes. Starting now. Delilah blinked like she couldn't quite believe it. Maybe she expected me to stand. Maybe she thought I'd melt at the sight of her again, that I'd feel something. I didn't. She looked like a painting left out in the rain, still beautiful to someone. Maybe, but the shape of her was running. Evelyn sat down like she owned the room, crossing her legs with the same elegance she used to dismiss me from holiday dinners. She was wearing the same brand of perfume I remembered from our first meeting, a suffocating blend of roses and vinegar. We're not here to fight, Russell said quickly. We're here to talk. About the company. About options. I folded my hands in front of me. Speak. He swallowed. As you may know, Hartwell Logistics has had some challenges. Market shifts. Supply chain disruption. And frankly, some internal mismanagement. I'll own that. We've hit a liquidity issue, and you're bankrupt, I said. He flinched. Evelyn's nostrils flared. That's not, Delilah started, but I cut her off with a glance. I read the filings. The debt maturity. The delinquent vendor payments. You leveraged too much, expanded too fast, and paid yourself too often. I know the truth. So let's not pretend you came here to explain it. A long silence. Russell nodded slowly. You're right. We need help. No, I said. You need saving. And the bank's already said no. Delilah stepped forward. We have equity assets. If we can bring in the right partner, we can restructure. You know the company's bones are still strong. I laughed. Bones. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. You built your house out of credit and pretension. You thought it would hold because it always had before. But that's not how storms work. They don't care about legacy. They don't care who your grandfather was. They just test every window, every nail, every weak point. And you, Delilah, are nothing if not a weak point. Her eyes flashed, but she didn't speak. Russell tried to salvage it. We're offering a stake, a controlling interest. You come in as CEO, restructure the firm. We stay on in advisory roles. It's mutually beneficial. Stop, I said. You had your 5 minutes. Now let me speak. I stood up, slowly, walked around the table to the side cabinet where I kept a small folder. I'd prepared it the moment Sasha warned me they'd reached out. I set it down on the table and opened it. Recognize this nurse? Delilah paled. It was a photo blurry but clear enough. An older woman in scrubs, standing beside a hospital bed. She took care of your grandfather in his final months. Sweet woman. Loyal. Until you threatened her job if she didn't testify against me. Delilah's lips parted. She told me everything, I continued. The lies. The coaching. The phone call you made the night before the hearing, feeding her the script. I have the recording. I have the bank transfers. I have signed affidavits from 3 former employees of your boutique, confirming you used my name to secure loans and then defaulted. Evelyn's voice was sharp. You can't prove. I don't need to prove anything, I said, calm now. You came here, not me. You came because the water's up to your chin, and I'm the only hand left. Russell looked like he'd been punched. You want $15 million, I said, and you have the audacity to ask it from the man you buried in court. You think just because I didn't fight back then, I won't now. Delilah's voice cracked. Grayson, we didn't know. You knew, I said coldly. You knew exactly what you were doing. And now you want my mercy. But I didn't build Blackwell for mercy. I built it for protection. They said nothing. The air was heavy with the realization that the man they thought had disappeared had instead turned himself into something they couldn't manipulate. I watched them squirm in designer silence. Their empire was collapsing. Their name meant nothing in this room. You should leave, I said, finally. Russell stood first. His shoulders sagged. He nodded once, then turned. Evelyn followed stiffly, still trying to maintain her dignity. But Delilah lingered. Just for a second. Do you hate me? She asked quietly. I met her eyes. No, I said. But I remember. She nodded like that was worse. Then she left. and the door shut behind them with the soft, definitive sound of a tomb ceiling. The silence after they left was almost sacred. I stood there, still as the skyline behind me, and let the quiet seep into my bones. That boardroom had seen venture capitalists, generals, tech giants, but never ghosts. And that's what they were now. Delilah, Russell, Evelyn. Hollow names with no more power than the past I'd already buried. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I didn't just want them to fall. I wanted them to know exactly how far they dropped before they hit the ground. I waited 3 days. Then I called Sasha into my office. Send them a meeting request, I said. She didn't flinch. Sasha never flinched. Same location? I nodded. This time, bring in coffee. Make it look civilized. She smirked, then left. They came back the next morning, like I knew they would. This time, Russell didn't bother with the double-breasted suit. He looked thinner, his eyes sunken in like someone had removed the last ounce of certainty from his bloodstream. Evelyn wore sunglasses, indoors, like they could hide the reality that she'd been crying or maybe just didn't want to be seen clearly. Delilah? She looked worse than before. Her hair was pulled back too tight, like she was trying to control what little remained in her orbit. Her jacket had a missing button near the cuff. Small things. But I noticed. I stood as they walked in, extended my hand. Not out of courtesy. Out of power. The man who stands and offers the handshake is the one who has nothing to lose. Russell hesitated, then took it. His grip was weak. Evelyn just nodded. Delilah tried to smile. We sat. Sasha brought in the coffee. Real porcelain cups. Nothing cheap or disposable. Everything I did was deliberate. Every detail was a message. Delilah started with pleasantries. Thank you for it. I held up a hand. Don't. She stopped. I pulled the folder from my drawer again. Only this time, I slid it open wider. More papers. More photos. More proof. Before we continue, I said, you should know I didn't just come prepared last time. I came armed. I tapped the top page. This is a signed affidavit from the nurse. She outlines everything, the threats, the instructions, even the bonus wire she received 3 days after the hearing. Here's the bank statement, showing it came from Evelyn's account, disguised as a consulting fee. Russell closed his eyes. I moved to the next document. 3 of Delilah's former employees submitted sworn statements detailing financial manipulation. She used my name to co-sign 2 loans after our divorce, forged my electronic signature, then ghosted when repayment hit. The banks pursued me. I had to defend myself while you were posting beach selfies. Delilah's voice was barely audible. I didn't. You did. I cut in. And even if you didn't, you watched it happen. Same difference. I turned to Evelyn. Remember when you told the judge I was emotionally unstable? That I had outbursts? That I broke things in the house? She didn't answer. I have recordings, I said. You were on speaker. I was sitting in the garage, phone in hand, staring at a dog that would later be taken from me. You didn't know I'd started recording everything by then. I was already building the case. Just in case. Russell looked like he wanted to speak, but he didn't. I let that sit for a moment, then leaned back. Here's what I've got. Multiple counts of fraud, perjury, and character defamation. Enough to sink your public image, maybe even drag this into federal court. But I'm not here to make threats. I don't need a trial. Delilah's voice trembled. Then what do you want? I smiled. I want the truth to sit with you. I want you to understand the scope of what you did. I want you to remember, in exact detail, how you dismantled a man who loved you, and how he rebuilt himself while you burned everything he gave you. She didn't cry. I expected her to. But no, Delilah didn't cry in public. That was her mother's specialty. Evelyn's hand. I held up one finger. Option 1. I do nothing. You fall. Bankruptcy is filed. Creditors come knocking. Your family name becomes a cautionary tale in business schools. Maybe there's a scandal. Maybe jail time. Maybe just shame. Either way, the legacy ends here. I held up a second finger. Option 2. I bail you out. Not as a partner. Not as a savior. As a buyer. You sign over the company. Every asset. The name. The estate in the Berkshires. Every vehicle. Every commercial property. Every slice of equity. I take it all. In exchange, I cover your debts and walk away. Evelyn gasped. You can't. I can, I said flatly. I already have the legal framework drafted. All I need is your signatures. Delilah stared at me like she'd seen a stranger crawl out of the man she thought she knew. You'd really do that? You did worse, I said. You just wore pearls while doing it. Russell's voice was dry. This isn't business. This is revenge. No, I said, standing. This is balance. I walked toward the window and looked out at the city. It sprawled below me like a living thing, ruthless, hungry, unapologetic. The perfect mirror for what I'd become. You told me I was nothing, I said without turning around. You left me with nothing. Now you want $15 million. So I'll ask one last time, how's that taste? No one answered. I turned back to face them. You have 24 hours. After that, I walk away, and I let the world see what your empire really looks like under sunlight. Delilah opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded. They stood one by one. No more arguments. No more bargaining. They walked out, and I was left alone again, but not empty. Not this time. This time, I held all the receipts. The next morning, the signatures came through. Not with ceremony. Not with a meeting. Just a series of scanned PDFs, dropped neatly into Sasha's inbox at 9:42 a.m., every page initialed, timestamped, and bloodless. The Hartwell family had folded. No fight. No threats. Just quiet surrender dressed in digital ink. The estate. The company. The properties. Everything they'd once used to build their little fortress of legacy was now mine. Sasha printed the final document and brought it to my desk. She didn't say anything, just placed the folder down and gave me a long, unreadable look. I flipped to the last page. The estate deed was signed by all three, Russell, Evelyn, Delilah. Her handwriting hadn't changed. Still too perfect, too smooth, like it was afraid of honesty. I traced the shape of the D in Delilah. That used to be the first letter of every morning for me, Delilah in the kitchen, pouring coffee, humming some tunes she half remembered from her mother. I used to believe in that version of her. Now all I saw was a signature of desperation. Sasha broke the silence. So, it's done. Not yet, I said. They think it is. But this is just the prelude. I left the office early that day. Drove to the Berkshires estate myself. I wanted to see it again, not because I missed it, but because I needed to stand on that porch and look at what I'd once been denied. The gates opened with a fresh keycard, no resistance. The house was just as I remembered, grand, but hollow. Like someone built it with ego instead of wood. I walked through the foyer slowly, the sound of my steps echoing off marble floors. Dust had started to gather in the corners, and the scent of stale flowers still lingered in the hallway. Evelyn must have ordered weekly arrangements back when they still believed they'd keep it. I stepped into the sunken living room, stood under that ridiculous crystal chandelier, and laughed. They offered me this life once. Back when I was still married. Back when Delilah dangled promises of inheritance and family ties like they were rewards for loyalty. But it always came with strings. Appearances to maintain. Versions of myself I had to shrink to fit into their world. They didn't want a partner. They wanted a prop. And I was too naive to understand that props get discarded when the script changes. Now I held the entire stage. I walked the perimeter of the property, boots crunching through the frostbitten grass. I found the bench near the pond where I once sat during a Hartwell Christmas party, feeling like a stranger in a sea of cashmere. Delilah had told me then, they just need time. They'll come around. I believed her. Thought love could translate across class, like it spoke louder than money. That was the last night I believed in her. By the time I got back to the car, the sky had gone soft with dusk. The estate didn't look noble anymore. It looked tired, like it was waiting for someone to put it out of its misery. And I intended to. Back in the city, Sasha had already lined up my legal team. Andre, my attorney, reviewed the documents again with surgical precision. We had no intention of preserving Hartwell Logistics. Its bones were rotten. We'd carve it up piece by piece, sell off the functional divisions, dissolve the bad debt, and bury the name. The estate would be liquidated. Every dollar earned would go into something better. Delilah called that night. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I needed her to hear mine. Grayson, she said. Soft. Cautious. Delilah, I replied. To what do I owe the pleasure? I just wanted to say thank you, she said carefully. For not humiliating us. For offering an out. I let the silence breathe. She wasn't calling out of gratitude. She was testing the ice. Seeing how thin it was. Seeing if I might still fall through. You know what the difference is between you and me? I said finally. She didn't answer. You take what doesn't belong to you and call it survival. I give people choices, and they call it cruelty. But I didn't force you to sign. I just reminded you how cold the world gets when the fire you started starts burning your own feet. You don't have to do this, she said quietly. Not like this. Like what? I asked. Holding you accountable? Turning your lies into leverage? You handed me the blade, Delilah. I just decided not to fall on it. She was silent again. Then, softer, I never wanted it to go this far. I actually smiled. You're not scared of the fall. You're scared that someone watched you climb and now owns the ladder. You're not the same man I married, she whispered. No, I said. I'm not. You killed him. But I buried him. And the man who rose afterward doesn't take breadcrumbs and call it dinner. She started to speak again, but I ended the call. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't even vindication. It was stillness. The kind that comes when the storm has finally stopped and you're standing in the wreckage, realizing you're still alive. I poured myself a drink. Sat on the balcony of my penthouse apartment, one paid for in full, no loans, no co-signers, and looked out over the city. It glittered like possibility, not because of what I'd taken back, but because of what I'd learned in the taking. Fear eats pride. That's what I'd said in the boardroom. And I meant it. They had pride, but I had memory. They had connections, but I had receipts. They had offers. But now, I made the terms. And they signed. The day the wire hit, I sat at my desk staring at a number I couldn't have imagined 5 years earlier. 9 figures. Real. Confirmed. Liquid. Every last cent transferred from the asset liquidation of Hartwell Logistics, the sale of their estate, their fleet, their remaining stock, and even Evelyn's beloved antique car collection. All of it gutted and converted to clean cash. Not one trophy left for them to cling to. The empire they built with arrogance and inherited vanity was now mine, and I'd already taken the wrecking ball to it. Andre handled the legal carnage like a surgeon. Sasha coordinated the sale process, making sure every press release was laced with language like restructuring, legacy division, and strategic exit, all while quietly dismantling everything from within. The headlines tried to make sense of it. Cybersecurity CEO acquires struggling logistics giant in surprise buyout. They speculated about a merger, a tech pivot, a visionary overhaul. But there was no pivot, no vision. There was only retribution, clean, silent, and surgical. And once it was over, once the money had settled and the legal filings were finalized, I did something none of them expected. I gave it all away. Not in some grand, headline-chasing act of charity. No ribbon cutting, no photo ops, no interviews with legacy magazines. I didn't need applause. I needed meaning. I donated the entire net profit from the dismantled Hartwell fortune to a foundation I quietly created months earlier, Second Ledger. It was designed to support victims of financial abuse. People who'd been stripped of resources, frozen out of accounts, left in the cold by legal systems rigged against them. We funded emergency grants, legal defense services, and shelters, actual physical places where someone could go when they had nowhere left to sleep but the backseat of a sedan. Places for people like the man I used to be. Alone. Ashamed. Broken in ways no spreadsheet could measure. The first shelter we opened was in Chicago. It bore the name the Evelyn House, not out of admiration, but as poetry. Let her name finally house someone for once in her life. A woman in her 60s named Carla was the first resident. She'd left her husband after 30 years of manipulation and theft disguised as marriage. We gave her a safe place to land. A job. A future. Then came the Delilah Fund, specifically for education and digital upskilling. That one made Sasha laugh when I told her the name. Really? She'd asked, arching a brow. You're going to name your redemption arc after her? No, I said. I'm naming it after the version of me that thought she loved me. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped hating Delilah. Hatred takes energy. And I needed mine for something better. Not revenge-proof. I bought back Max. Not literally. He was gone. Too many years had passed. I'd searched, quietly, using contacts, friends in vet networks, even animal shelters. Nothing. It crushed me in a way nothing else could. But I commissioned a bronze statue of him, life-sized, tail midwag, and placed it at the entrance of the Delilah Fund's main building. A reminder. Of love. Of loss. Of loyalty undeserved. I never told anyone about the moment I stood there after it was installed, hand resting on the cold curve of his ears, whispering, I'm sorry, buddy. That moment was mine. The press didn't get wind of anything until the third shelter opened in Atlanta. That one bore my name, or at least the initials, GC House. A journalist connected the dots, tracked the funding back to my holding company, and ran the story. Grayson Camden's Silent Justice. Billionaire CEO funds network for financial abuse victims. Suddenly, everyone had questions. Editorials, panel discussions, debates on intent. Was it altruism or vengeance? A redemption arc or a PR strategy? I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I wasn't angry anymore. I was clean. I'd taken everything they used to mock me. My silence, my softness, my loyalty, and I turned it into the sharpest blade in the room. Not to draw blood, but to cut myself free from the weight of ever needing their approval again. The people who once laughed at me now studied me in boardrooms. The same judges who overlooked me read my filings and whispered behind closed doors. The woman who thought I would crawl back now lived in a rented townhouse with her name removed from every deed that ever mattered. And me? I slept. God, I finally slept. No nightmares. No phantom courtrooms. No lingering shame. Just rest. The kind that fills your lungs and makes you remember what it means to breathe without waiting for the next punch. Some nights, I walked through the city anonymously. Hoodie up. Hands in pockets. Watching lives play out behind restaurant windows and subway cars. Nobody knew me on those nights. And that was the point. I didn't want to be known. I wanted to be grounded. To remember what it felt like to exist without being hunted or haunted. I passed a man once, curled up near a subway grate, guarding a plastic bag like it held gold. I stopped, took off my coat, draped it over him without a word. He didn't wake. But when he did, he'd be warmer. That was enough. Andre once asked me if I ever planned to rebuild something for myself. A new company. A new empire. I told him no. I didn't want to build again. I wanted to clear the field. So no one else had to start from rubble. That was my legacy. Not what I took, but what I refused to keep. The photos sat in an old shoebox I hadn't touched in years, buried under receipts, business cards, and an unopened envelope addressed to my younger self. One Delilah had once slipped into my laptop bag with the words, "Open when you doubt us," written in blue ink. I never did. Not when she said it. Not after she left. And certainly not now. I found the box during a quiet night, the kind where silence doesn't scream anymore but whispers in softer tones. I'd had a glass of whiskey, neat. No music. No city sounds bleeding in from the penthouse balcony. Just me, the burn of 12-year single malt, and the instinct to go looking not for pain, but for the proof that it had ever been real. The photo was still glossy. Me and Delilah, arms looped around each other, both smiling like we had just won something instead of barely begun. It had been taken at our engagement dinner, right before her father's toast. I remembered the way she leaned in to whisper, "Don't let their silence fool you. We belong here." I believed her. That night, I believed everything. Now, I looked at that image and saw ghosts. The boy I was, bright-eyed and eager to be loved. The girl she pretended to be long enough to hook a future to her name. In between us, something that looked like happiness, captured, framed, and false. I held the photo over the sink, just for a second. Then I walked out to the balcony. The city below pulsed with quiet light. There was a steady hum that never quite silenced itself, horns, air units, footsteps, conversations between people who still had lives to mess up or fix. I watched them all from 36 stories above, the skyline folding into the horizon like a living mosaic. And then, without drama, without hesitation, I burned it. The photo curled slowly at first. Her smile warped. My eyes blackened. The edges turned to ash and scattered into the night air like dust from an old tomb. I let it go, just as I had let go of the life it once promised. I didn't need it anymore. I'd built something better than revenge. I'd built proof. Proof that survival isn't a passive act. It's not just what's left after the storm clears. It's the decision to rebuild in full view of the people who thought you couldn't. The ones who took from you thinking you'd stay buried. The ones who counted on your silence to protect their image. They left me for dead. I didn't just get back up. I walked into rooms they never thought I'd enter again. I bought the floor under their feet and watched them beg for ground. And I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. All I had to do was offer them what they gave me. A signature. And silence. The irony was never lost on me. They taught me this. Delilah with her poised cruelty, Russell with his conditional respect, Evelyn with her passive-aggressive smiles. Even Marco with his spineless betrayal dressed in friendship. They carved out the rules. They shaped the battlefield. I just learned how to fight on it better than they ever imagined. But the win wasn't the money. It wasn't the headlines. It wasn't even the empire I could have built from the ashes. It was the peace. It was the ability to sit alone in my home, drink in hand, and know that no one held a leash around my neck anymore. That every dollar in my account, every brick in the shelters I funded, every encrypted protocol in Blackwell's architecture was mine. Not gifted, not granted, earned, through pain, through discipline, through decisions made in the dark that finally saw the light. Sometimes Sasha asked me if I'd ever marry again. She didn't ask it like a friend, more like an analyst reading a trend. I always told her no. Not because I don't believe in love, but because I believe in cost. And I paid mine already. I don't need another contract to prove I'm capable of commitment. Look at what I've built. Look at what I've carried. Look at what I let go. My legacy isn't a name etched into glass or a title on a door. It's in the systems I left behind for others to use. The foundations. The digital safe houses. The survivors who didn't have to choose between pride and shelter because I'd already cleared that path for them. That's what I built. People think revenge is about destruction. It's not. It's about construction of something stronger than what broke you. That night, after the last cinder from the photo blew into the wind, I walked back inside. The lights were dim, the air still. I poured a second glass and sat at the piano in the corner of the room. I hadn't played it in years. Delilah used to say I only played when I was soft. She said it like it was an insult. But that's the thing about being soft. It's what teaches you how to rebuild. It's what lets you feel the damage as it happens, so you know exactly how to recover. I pressed a key, then another. The melody came back to me slowly, like a friend returning without apology. I didn't need applause. I didn't need an audience. I had silence again, and this time it was mine. I never expected my marriage to Sophia to be perfect. I wasn't naive. I knew from the beginning that her love for me wasn't the same as my love for her. But I had convinced myself that it didn't matter. To me, she was my wife, my partner, the woman I thought I'd build a life with. To her, I was a stepping stone, a way to maintain her luxurious lifestyle after her father decided he was done funding her excesses. Our house, a 3-story mansion in the wealthiest district, was proof of that. A pristine, modern estate with floor-to-ceiling windows, imported marble floors, and an infinity pool she loved to pose in front of for Instagram. Every detail of our life was curated for appearances. I paid for everything. The cars, the designer clothes, the exclusive spa retreats, the vacations she flexed online to make her followers jealous. It wasn't that I minded providing for my wife. I had more than enough wealth to make it happen. But what I minded was her indifference toward me. To the world, we were the perfect couple. She posted carefully staged photos, painting a picture of an enviable marriage. Candlelit dinners, surprise gifts, affectionate captions beneath our images. But behind closed doors, we were nothing more than two strangers coexisting under the same roof. I told myself I could live with it. I told myself that love, real love, didn't have to be the foundation of our marriage. I had married a beautiful, refined woman who fit perfectly into my world. Maybe, in time, that would be enough. I was wrong. Because 1 week before Eleanor's birthday party, she made it clear that I was nothing more than a wallet in her world. It started with something small. I had walked into the living room, still in my suit after a long day at work. Sophia was lounging on the sectional, scrolling through her phone, her long legs stretched out in silk pajamas that probably cost more than what some people made in a month. A glass of wine sat on the table beside her, half finished. She didn't bother looking up. "Did you transfer the money for the party yet?" she asked, her voice casual, as if she were asking about the weather. I glanced at her. "No, not yet." That finally made her look up, her perfectly arched brows pulling together in mild irritation. "Why not?" I sighed, loosening my tie. "Because I wanted to go over the budget first. You haven't even told me how much this thing is going to cost." She rolled her eyes, setting her phone down. "Does it matter?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Does it matter?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Sophia, last time you planned an event, the bill was over 30 grand. And that was for a small gathering." She scoffed. "Oh, come on. Don't be dramatic. That was different. Eleanor's birthday is important. We can't just throw some cheap backyard barbecue." I said, arching a brow. "You mean me? Because I'm the one footing the bill, aren't I?" She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't start this again, Alex." I clenched my jaw. Alex. That was me. Her husband. The man she had married not out of love, but out of necessity. I had known the truth before we said our vows. I had known that her father cutting her off had pushed her into my arms, not some grand romantic revelation. But for some stupid reason, I had hoped that with time, she would see me as more than a financial safety net. Tonight, I realized how foolish that hope had been. She sighed, giving me a pointed look. Listen, the guest list is exclusive. These are the kind of people who can open doors for us. You wouldn't understand, but trust me, it matters. I let out a slow breath, dragging a hand down my face. You know what? Fine. Just send me the details, and I'll handle it. Her expression smoothed into satisfaction as she picked up her wine glass again. Good. I already told the planner to go ahead with the premium package. Just transfer the money by tomorrow. Of course you did, I muttered. I turned to leave, my patience hanging by a thread, but her next words stopped me cold. Oh, and Alex? I turned my head slightly, waiting. Make sure you dress appropriately for the party. The photographers will be there, and we wouldn't want you looking out of place. Out of place? In my own marriage. Something inside me shifted at that moment. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something much colder. Something final. I walked away without another word, my mind already racing. For the past 3 years, I had been playing the part of the dutiful husband, funding her lifestyle, giving her everything she wanted, pretending I didn't see the way she barely tolerated my presence. But this was the moment I finally accepted the truth. Sophia didn't see me as her partner. She saw me as her bank account. She had no idea that I was done playing along, that this party she was so obsessed with would be the beginning of her downfall. Are you even listening, Lucas? Sophia snapped, waving a guest list in front of me. I barely glanced up from my laptop, keeping my expression neutral. I heard you. She let out an exaggerated sigh, pacing in front of the fireplace like a queen issuing commands. Then answer me. This party is going to be huge. We need the right people there, important people. Every detail has to be perfect, and I need to make sure you're actually taking this seriously. I set my laptop aside and leaned back on the couch, watching her. It was almost amusing, her dramatics, the way she carried herself as if everything revolved around her. It had always been like this. She was standing there in her silk robe, effortlessly elegant, her hair cascading down her back in perfect waves. If a stranger walked in, they would assume she was a woman deeply in love with her husband, planning an event for their shared happiness. But I knew better. I had been watching her closely these past few weeks, and if there was one thing I had finally accepted, it was that nothing about this marriage was real. I exhaled slowly. It's Eleanor's birthday, Sophia, not a networking event. She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. Same thing. I narrowed my eyes, my fingers tapping against my thigh. She wasn't even pretending anymore. There was no warmth, no affection, just an obsession with maintaining an image. For 3 years, I had let her take the lead on these things. I had handed over my card without question, nodding along as she hosted extravagant dinners, planned elaborate vacations, and surrounded herself with people who barely tolerated her outside of what she could provide. I had excused it as part of the deal, but this time, something felt different. She continued, listing off the so-called right people that had to be there. The socialites, the investors, the elite who would judge her if anything was less than perfection. Then she paused, looking at me expectantly. Did you book the venue? She asked. I nodded once. Yes. And the catering? Handled. She sighed dramatically, collapsing onto the couch beside me. At least you're good for something, she muttered under her breath. A sharp sting of irritation crawled up my spine, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had paid for everything, planned everything, and still, in her eyes, I was nothing more than a convenient source of income. She picked up her phone and started scrolling, no doubt drafting the next perfectly curated Instagram post. To her, all of this, the mansion, the events, even me, was just a prop in her picture-perfect life. I watched her for a long moment. The way she effortlessly dismissed me, the way she didn't even care about how her words landed. And then I realized, this party wasn't for Eleanor. It was for Sophia. A chance to remind everyone that she was still the queen of high society, even if she was no longer daddy's little princess. A chance to show off. She had no idea that this night would be the beginning of her downfall. That evening, I sat in my home office, scrolling through the final guest list on my laptop. A list of power players, socialites, and high-profile names. Some were expected, Her mother, Eleanor, the woman the entire party was supposedly for. The one person in Sophia's family who had ever treated me like I belonged. Then there were her so-called friends. Tessa, Naomi, Rachel, the same women who were just as fake as she was. Women who thrived on gossip and turned on each other the moment it was convenient. And then I saw a name that made my stomach twist. Derek, her ex-fiancé, the one who had left her when he realized what kind of woman she really was. My fingers tightened around the mouse. I had never spoken about it, but I knew. I knew that Derek had been her first choice. That if he hadn't walked away, I wouldn't even be sitting here, reading this list. My mind was already racing when I heard the soft click of heels on the floor behind me. Sophia. She leaned against the doorway, sipping a glass of red wine, looking effortlessly unbothered. She mused, tilting her head. I didn't look at her. Derek. I asked, my voice flat. She took another slow sip before smiling. Oh, relax, Lucas. We're adults. Besides, I thought it would be entertaining. Entertaining. I clenched my fists under the table. It wasn't about Derek. It was about control. She wanted me to know that no matter what I did, she could do whatever she wanted. I forced a smile, turning my head just enough to meet her gaze. Sure, let's make it a night to remember. She gave a pleased little smirk, thinking she had won something. She had no idea how much she'd regret it. Over the next few days, the party planning continued in full force. I played my part. I nodded when needed. I agreed to the overpriced floral arrangements, the Michelin star catering, the live string quartet. But inside, I was waiting for the moment everything shifted. Because if Sophia thought she could humiliate me, if she thought she could use me and toss me aside like an old accessory, she was in for a rude awakening. This wasn't just about a party anymore. This was about making her understand exactly what she had taken for granted. She wanted a grand spectacle? Fine. I'd give her one. One that she'd never forget. And by the end of the night, the only person paying for it would be her. That night, I sat alone in my home office, staring at the final guest list on my laptop. I could feel the weight of it. The weight of every single name. Each one carefully chosen, each invitation sent with meticulous precision. And yet, one name stood out among the rest. Derek, her ex-fiancé. I ran a finger over my jaw, exhaling slowly. I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly what this was. Sophia had no reason to invite him. They hadn't spoken in years, not since he had left her when he realized what kind of woman she really was. He had been her first choice, the man she had been groomed to marry, the one her father had wanted for her. And yet, somehow, I had been the one standing at the altar that day, slipping a diamond ring onto her finger. Not because she had chosen me, but because I had been the most convenient option after Derek walked away. And now? Now, she was bringing him into my home, to my event, sitting comfortably in the knowledge that no matter what, I wouldn't do anything about it. I clenched my jaw. She had no idea. I closed the laptop and pushed back from my desk. From downstairs, I could hear the distant hum of Sophia on the phone, laughing lightly, probably finalizing details with the planner. The sound grated on my nerves. I stood, walking to the window, looking out over the city skyline. 3 years. 3 years I had played this role, pretending I didn't see the truth. Pretending I was blind to who she really was. And for what? For a marriage that was nothing but a business transaction? For a woman who paraded herself as my wife in public, only to dismiss me in private? I let out a slow breath. No, that ended now. This party? It wasn't going to be the spectacle she envisioned. It was going to be the stage for her downfall. And she didn't even see it coming. The next morning, Sophia waltzed into the kitchen with her phone in one hand, barely glancing at me as she sat at the marble island. Are you free later? She asked, sipping her coffee. I set my mug down, watching her carefully. Why? She waved a hand. I have a fitting for my dress. I want to make sure it complements your suit. I arched a brow. Since when do you care about that? She shot me a look over the rim of her cup. Since always, Lucas. You're my husband. We have to look good together. People will notice if we don't. There it was. She didn't care about us. Only the image of us. She needed me to be the perfect accessory, just as polished and pristine as the life she had carefully curated for herself. I tilted my head, considering her. She had no idea that the very foundation of her world was about to crumble. I took another sip of my coffee. Sure, I'll come. She smiled, clearly pleased. Good. And you transferred the money for the party, right? I set my cup down. Not yet. Her smile faltered slightly. Lucas, she sighed. I told you it needed to be done yesterday. I leaned back, stretching my arms lazily. And I told you I wanted to go over the details first. She narrowed her eyes, irritation flickering across her face. I already told you. Everything is handled. You don't need to micromanage me. I smiled slightly. I know. I just like knowing where my money is going. She huffed, rolling her eyes. Don't be ridiculous. Just send the payment today, okay? I nodded, sipping my coffee again. Sure. I'll take care of it. Just not the way she expected. That night, I sat in the study, my fingers tapping against my knee as I scrolled through my own list. Unlike hers, mine was much shorter. A private investigator, a discreet legal team, a financial analyst. 3 names. 3 people who had been quietly working behind the scenes for the past month. Because while Sophia had been planning a party, I had been planning my exit. I had done the research. I had seen the hidden transactions, the quiet withdrawals, the large sums of money missing from our accounts. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I wouldn't care. She thought she could spend my money however she pleased, without consequence. She was wrong. So wrong. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing screen. In less than a week, she would regret underestimating me. The next day, the final preparations for the party were in full swing. I watched from the corner of the living room as decorators swarmed the house, setting up elaborate floral arrangements and absurdly expensive chandeliers. Sophia was in her element. Flitting from person to person, barking orders, making sure everything was exactly as she envisioned. Lucas, she called, barely looking at me as she motioned toward a folder. I need you to confirm the wine order with the sommelier. The vintage selection has to be perfect. I walked over, picking up the folder. Expensive taste. She smirked. Obviously, we don't serve anything but the best. I flipped through the pages, eyeing the astronomical price tags on the imported wines she had selected. I made a small, approving noise before shutting the folder. Sure, I'll handle it. She grinned, pressing a quick kiss to my cheek. Purely for appearance, since there were people watching. That's why I married you, she said lightly. I let out a quiet chuckle. If only she knew. By the time this party was over, she wouldn't be married to me anymore. And she wouldn't have a single penny of my money left to her name. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft sound of Sophia breathing beside me. Oblivious, unconcerned, still thinking that she was untouchable. But in just a few days, everything would change. The final puzzle pieces were in place. The guest list was locked in. The stage was set. And all that was left was to let the show begin. The night of the party had arrived. From the moment I stepped outside, I knew exactly what kind of night this was going to be. The venue, an exclusive ballroom in the heart of the city, was decorated with absurd extravagance. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting golden light over velvet-draped tables set with imported china and gold-plated utensils. The walls were lined with massive floral arrangements, the kind you'd expect at a royal wedding, not a birthday party. Every detail screamed money and status. And yet, none of it was for Eleanor. This wasn't about celebrating her mother's birthday. It was about Sophia's image. Her need to be the center of attention, to remind the world that despite her father cutting her off, despite losing her family's backing, she was still powerful, still untouchable, still the queen of high society. I exhaled slowly, adjusting my cufflinks as I stepped onto the red carpet leading to the entrance. Photographers were stationed outside, snapping pictures of the guests as they arrived in their luxury cars, dressed in designer labels, dripping in diamonds. And then, there she was, Sophia, standing at the entrance, a champagne flute in one hand, her other delicately placed on her hip as she posed for the cameras. She looked stunning, of course. She always did. Her gown was custom, an intricate beaded design that shimmered under the lights, hugging her body perfectly, emphasizing the effortless elegance she wanted the world to see. She caught sight of me and smiled. Not a genuine smile. A practiced, public-facing smile, the kind meant to sell the illusion. She walked toward me, slipping her arm through mine, leaning in slightly. "You're late," she murmured under her breath. I glanced at her, my expression unreadable. "Am I?" Her fingers tightened around my arm for just a second before she let out a soft laugh, one designed for the onlookers. "You know how these events work, darling. Timing is everything." I let my lips curve into a slow smirk. Oh, she had no idea how right she was. Inside, the ballroom was already buzzing with energy. Waiters in crisp black suits moved smoothly through the crowd, balancing trays of champagne and imported hors d'oeuvres. Everywhere I looked, people were engaged in polite, meaningless conversation, business deals disguised as casual chatter, backhanded compliments exchanged with polite smiles, alliances being strengthened with a clink of expensive wine glasses. This was Sophia's world, a world of wealth and appearances, power and deception, and she thrived in it. She moved through the room like she belonged on a stage, greeting guests with effortless charm, laughing at the right moments, making sure she was always at the center of attention. She was in her element. She thought she had won, that she was still in control, that I was still playing my role as the devoted, oblivious husband. But she didn't know what I knew. She didn't know what was coming. Not yet. An hour into the party, I had settled into observing. Sophia was busy entertaining her guests, basking in the glow of their admiration. I stayed in the background, nursing a glass of bourbon, watching the pieces fall into place. That's when I saw him. Derek. He had just arrived, stepping into the ballroom like he belonged there, dressed in a tailored black suit, exuding effortless confidence. Sophia noticed immediately. I saw the way her eyes flickered toward him, the brief hesitation before she quickly masked it with a smile. A practiced, careful smile. But I knew her tells. I had spent 3 years studying them, learning them. She had invited him for a reason. Not to be adults about it, as she had claimed. Not for entertainment. She had invited him because she wanted to prove something. To herself. To me. To him. I took a slow sip of my drink, keeping my expression neutral as I watched them exchange polite greetings. Derek played his part well. He was cordial, charming, the perfect guest. But I wasn't stupid. I saw the way she tilted her head just slightly when she spoke to him. The way her fingers lingered on the edge of her glass. The way she smiled a little too long. She was testing me, trying to see if I would react, trying to see if she could still get under my skin. I almost laughed. She had no idea. As the night went on, the atmosphere grew more electric. The guests were fully settled in, conversations becoming looser as the expensive wine continued to flow. Then, at exactly 9 p.m., Sophia took the stage. She stood under the golden chandeliers, her champagne flute in hand, radiating confidence as she addressed the room. Everyone, she began, her voice carrying effortlessly over the crowd. I just want to take a moment to thank you all for being here tonight. She turned toward her mother, Eleanor, giving a dazzling smile. This night is about celebrating an incredible woman, she continued. A woman who has shaped me into who I am today. So let's raise a glass to the one and only, my beautiful mother, Eleanor. The guests applauded, lifting their glasses in a toast. And then, just as the moment was perfect, just as Sophia was basking in her own orchestrated glory, a waiter stepped onto the stage. A waiter holding the bill. A $22,489 bill. Sophia's smile barely faltered as she glanced at him, clearly expecting him to quietly disappear. Instead, he leaned in, his voice polite but firm. Ma'am, just confirming the payment method. Will this be on one card or split? The entire room fell into silence. Sophia blinked. Excuse me. The waiter remained professional, unshaken by the weight of the moment. We need confirmation before we proceed with the final charges. A flicker of something crossed her face. Confusion, then irritation, then uncertainty. She turned toward me. Lucas, she said lightly, her voice carefully controlled. Take care of this, won't you? I took a slow sip of my bourbon, letting the silence stretch. I saw the way the guests were starting to whisper, glancing between us. I saw the way her mother frowned, the way Derek tilted his head, intrigued. Finally, I set my glass down, and I smiled. Oh, sweetheart, I said, my voice carrying just enough to be heard. I thought you were paying for it. Her expression froze. The air shifted. The tension in the room thickened. And for the first time that night, I saw it. The flicker of panic in her eyes. She had no idea what was happening. She had no idea that this was only the beginning. The silence stretched long and heavy. Sophia stood frozen, her fingers tightening around the delicate stem of her champagne flute. Her expression was unreadable to most, but I knew her too well. That flicker of panic in her eyes? It was real. The waiter remained still, his presence an unmovable force in the sea of now murmuring guests. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't backing down. Because this was protocol, when an event of this scale reached its final tab, the venue needed to confirm the method of payment before proceeding. And Sophia? She had assumed, as always, that I would simply handle it without question. Her lips parted slightly before she quickly regained her composure, turning to me with a carefully rehearsed expression, one of playful exasperation, the kind meant to smooth over any awkward situation. "Lucas," she said lightly, laughter forced into her voice. "Can we not do this right now?" I leaned back in my chair, fingers tapping idly against my bourbon glass. I let the moment breathe, let the room absorb the tension before I spoke. "Sophia," I said, my voice smooth, just loud enough to be heard. "I assumed you'd be covering this. After all, you planned every detail of this party." A few people chuckled under their breath. I saw her mother's frown deepen. I saw Derek's eyebrows lift slightly, curiosity sparking in his gaze. And Sophia? She was furious. She was good at masking it. Her entire existence revolved around controlling perception, but I knew her tells. The subtle twitch in her jaw. The way her fingers clenched slightly before relaxing. She was calculating, trying to fix this before it spiraled. "Of course," she said smoothly, turning back to the waiter. "Charge it to our usual account." The waiter gave her an apologetic smile. "I'm afraid that card was declined, ma'am." The whispers grew louder. My smirk deepened. For the first time that night, Sophia looked at me with actual fear. Not the kind of fear you get when you're embarrassed in front of friends. Not the kind of fear that comes from a minor inconvenience. This was the kind of fear that seeps into your bones, the kind that comes when you realize the ground beneath you is crumbling and there's nothing to hold on to. She didn't know what was happening. She didn't know why her card wasn't working. But I did, because I had made sure of it. 3 days ago, while Sophia had been busy orchestrating this circus, I had been making my own preparations. I had hired the best financial team money could buy, discreet, precise, and ruthless. They had gone through every single account tied to my name, every joint credit line, every hidden expense she thought I wouldn't notice. And then, I cut her off. I had moved everything into accounts she couldn't touch. I had canceled every card linked to her spending habits, including the ones she didn't even know I knew about. And I had done it without saying a word. Because this wasn't just about teaching her a lesson. This was about taking back control. Sophia let out a light laugh, but it wasn't real. She turned to the waiter, her voice measured, but tight. "There must be a mistake. Run it again." The waiter nodded, stepping away to confirm. She turned back to me, her smile still intact, but her eyes burning. "Lucas," she said through gritted teeth. "What the hell is going on?" I raised my brows, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean," she hissed, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. My card was declined. I took a slow sip of bourbon, letting the warmth spread through me before I set the glass down with a soft clink. "That's unfortunate," I mused. "Maybe we should check your finances." Her nostrils flared. She was starting to realize. The control she had always wielded so effortlessly, it was gone. The waiter returned. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The transaction is still being declined. Do you have another method of payment?" Sophia's throat bobbed slightly as she swallowed. And that's when it happened. The guests, the same ones she had spent so much time impressing, the ones she had curated for this event, started to whisper among themselves. I could hear fragments of their murmurs. Did she seriously throw this party without money to pay for it? I thought she had her finances together. Wasn't she cut off by her father? Maybe Lucas isn't as generous as she thought. She heard it too. Her breath hitched just slightly. I could see the calculations spinning in her mind. How to salvage this? How to flip the narrative before it collapsed completely? But there was nothing she could do. Because this wasn't just a small oversight. This was a public humiliation. And I had orchestrated every second of it. Sophia turned to me, her voice a whisper now, sharp and edged with panic. "Fix this." I tilted my head slightly. Why would I do that? Her fingers tightened into a white-knuckled grip on the tablecloth. "Because you're my husband," she bit out. "And you wouldn't humiliate me like this." I gave her a long, slow look. Then, I leaned in, just enough that only she could hear me. "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured, my voice low and calm. "I thought you said I was only good for paying the bills." Her breath caught, and in that moment, I saw it. The exact second she realized. I wasn't playing along anymore. I wasn't her punching bag, her wallet, her background character in the world she had built for herself. I was done, and she was on her own. The waiter cleared his throat. "Ma'am, would you like to put the charges on another account?" Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line. And then, the final blow. Her mother stood up. Eleanor, who had watched this unfold with silent disapproval, who had always been aware of her daughter's entitlement, but had never intervened. Until now. "Cancel the remaining orders," Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "This party is over." Sophia's head snapped toward her. "Mother, wait. I will not be part of this disgrace," Eleanor cut in coldly. "You have embarrassed yourself enough." Sophia's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because she knew. She had lost. Everything she had planned, everything she had built for tonight, had collapsed in a matter of minutes. And as the guests slowly started to leave, shaking their heads, whispering amongst themselves, I simply leaned back in my chair, watching her world crumble. Because this was just the beginning. I watched Sophia stand there, frozen. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched her champagne flute, her knuckles white against the delicate glass. Her carefully curated world, the one she had spent years crafting, the one she had always controlled so effortlessly, was now slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. The murmurs in the ballroom hadn't died down. If anything, they had grown louder. People were talking, whispering behind their hands, pretending to be discreet, but failing miserably. And Sophia? She felt it. The weight of their judgment. The humiliation. Her mother, Eleanor, had already left, her disgust written plainly on her face. The socialites, the executives, the influencers who had once flocked to her, who had been eager to stand beside her in pictures, now avoided her gaze. She wasn't just embarrassed. She was losing them. The people she had built her life around. And yet, even as everything crumbled, she still had the audacity to turn to me, her eyes filled with silent rage. "You did this," she hissed under her breath, so softly that no one else could hear. I leaned back, my fingers drumming lazily against my empty bourbon glass. "Did what?" I asked, my tone casual. She stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. "Don't play dumb, Lucas. You planned this. You set me up." I tilted my head, feigning curiosity. "You mean, I didn't bail you out? That's hardly the same thing as setting you up." Her nails dug into her palm. "You canceled my cards. You cut off my accounts. I don't know how, but I know you did it." I swirled the last few drops of bourbon in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "Sophia," I said, my voice calm, "I'm just confused. You always insisted you were independent, that you didn't need me. But now, suddenly you do?" Her breath hitched. She knew she had walked into that one. For years, she had treated me as nothing more than a financial safety net. She had dismissed me, mocked me, controlled every part of this marriage because she had assumed I would never fight back. And now, here she was, cornered, helpless. But she wasn't done yet. No, Sophia never admitted defeat that easily. She straightened, lifting her chin as if she could still salvage this. "This party was for my mother," she said, her voice carefully controlled, her attempt at turning the narrative. "And you ruined it. You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I arched a brow. "You embarrassed yourself." She inhaled sharply, her shoulders stiff. I stood, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. The movement was slow, deliberate. I wanted her to feel the shift in power. And she did. For the first time in our marriage, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Fear. Not fear of me. Fear of losing everything. Fear of what came next. I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping just enough that only she could hear. "This was never about Eleanor. This was about you. Your image. Your control. And tonight, you lost all of it." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. Because she couldn't argue with the truth. I glanced at the dwindling crowd, then back at her. "Enjoy the rest of your night, Sophia." Then I walked away. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt free. I left the ballroom, stepping outside into the cool night air. The sound of distant traffic hummed in the background, a stark contrast to the chaos inside. I pulled out my phone, checking my messages. Everything was in motion. By the time Sophia got home, she would realize this wasn't just a temporary power move. This was permanent. I had already removed her from all financial accounts. Her credit cards? Canceled. Her access to our shared assets? Gone. The house, the three-story mansion she loved so much. Legally, it was mine. And as of tonight, the eviction notice was waiting for her. Because this wasn't just about the money. This was about her learning what it felt like to be discarded, just like she had discarded me for years. My driver pulled up to the curb, and I slid into the back seat, exhaling slowly as I loosened my tie. "Home, sir?" the driver asked. I glanced back at the entrance of the venue, imagining the storm brewing inside. Sophia scrambling, realizing she had no way to fix this, that her resources were gone, her power was gone, and, most importantly, her control over me was gone. I smiled. "Yes," I said. "Take me home." I arrived at the house just before midnight. The mansion was dark, silent, eerily so. For years, it had been a showcase, a stage where Sophia curated the illusion of perfection. But tonight, without her hollow presence, it felt different. Peaceful. I walked inside, loosening the top buttons of my shirt, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then, I poured myself another drink and settled into the leather chair in my office, staring at my phone. I knew it was only a matter of time. And sure enough, 20 minutes later, the front door slammed open. I smirked, taking a slow sip of bourbon. "Here we go?" Sophia stormed into my office, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. She was still in her party gown, but the carefully constructed mask she wore in public was gone. Her face was flushed with anger, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You had no right," she spat, slamming her hands onto my desk. I tilted my head, pretending to think. "No right to what?" She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh, don't play games with me, Lucas. You cut me off." I swirled my drink lazily. "I did." Her nostrils flared. "You can't just throw me out like this." I leaned back, arching a brow. "You mean the same way you treated me like an ATM for years? Like I was nothing more than a means to your lifestyle?" She blinked rapidly, as if she hadn't expected me to be so direct. "You're my husband," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "You can't just cut me off like I'm some stranger." I set my glass down, leveling her with a steady gaze. "You made it very clear, Sophia," I said, my voice calm but firm. "That's exactly what I am to you. A stranger. A wallet. And now..." I shrugged. "Now, I'm nothing to you. Just like you always wanted." Her breath hitched. Because she knew. She had lost. And for the first time, she had no idea what to do about it. Sophia stood there, breathing heavily, her hands gripping the edge of my desk, as if holding on for dear life. For the first time in our entire marriage, she looked powerless. Her gown, which had once shimmered under the ballroom lights, now looked out of place. A symbol of the life she thought she controlled, a life that was now slipping through her fingers. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice raw. I exhaled slowly, taking a sip of my bourbon before setting the glass down with a quiet clink. I already did. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She was still processing, still trying to comprehend the full extent of what had just happened to her life. "You canceled my cards," she said finally, her voice shaking. "You cut me off." I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly. "Yes. You." She let out a breathless laugh, though there was no humor in it. "You emptied our accounts." I smiled slightly. "No, Sophia. I emptied my accounts." Her hands trembled against the wood. "That house is mine," I continued, my voice steady. "The cars, the accounts, the investments, they were always mine. And now, you have nothing." I could see it happening. The moment reality crashed over her like a tidal wave. For so long, she had lived under the illusion that she was in control, that no matter how she treated me, no matter how she dismissed me, I would always be there to provide for her, to clean up her messes, to play my role as her obedient, forgotten husband. She never once considered that I might wake up, that I might fight back, that I might leave her with nothing. Her breath came faster, her chest rising and falling. "You wouldn't do this to me," she said, her voice desperate now, frantic. You love me, Lucas." I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. She was grasping at straws now. "Love," I repeated, arching a brow. "Is that what you call what we had?" She flinched. "You never loved me, Sophia." I continued, my voice lower now, sharper. "You loved what I could give you. You loved the money, the security, the status. But me?" I leaned forward, meeting her wide, desperate gaze. "You never gave a damn about me." Tears pooled in her eyes, but I knew better. Sophia didn't cry for love. She cried for loss, for power slipping through her fingers, for the life she thought she had secured now unraveling in front of her. I can fix this, she whispered suddenly, her voice softer now, almost pleading. Lucas, just let's talk. We can work this out. I watched her carefully, my expression unreadable. Work this out. Now, suddenly, she wanted to fix things. Now, when she had nothing left, when she was finally feeling what it was like to be on the receiving end of the humiliation and neglect she had given me for years, she wanted to talk. I exhaled slowly, standing up from my chair, adjusting my suit. I walked around the desk, stopping right in front of her. She looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. For a moment, I just stared at her. At the woman I had once thought I could build a life with. At the woman who had spent 3 years using me. You don't love me, Sophia, I said quietly, my voice filled with finality. You never did. And now, you're not even pretending to. She blinked rapidly. Lucas, please. I shook my head. This isn't a negotiation, I interrupted, my voice firmer now. I didn't do this to hurt you, Sophia. I did this because I finally understood something. Her lips trembled. What? I stared at her for a long moment. That you were never my wife, I said. You were just an expensive lesson. Her breath caught in her throat. For the first time in our entire marriage, she looked small, weak, defeated. I turned away, walking toward the door. Lucas, she called, her voice breaking. Wait. I paused but didn't look back. Where am I supposed to go? She whispered. I closed my eyes briefly, then exhaled. Not my problem. And with that, I walked out of the room. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could finally breathe. I heard the front door slam behind me as I stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky was dark, the streets quiet. A new beginning. A fresh start. No more lies. No more pretending. Just me, free from the weight of a woman who never truly saw me as anything more than a bank account with a heartbeat. I pulled out my phone, dialing a number I had memorized. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Lucas. I exhaled. It's done. There was silence on the other end, then a soft chuckle. About damn time. I smiled. Because they were right. It was about time. I got into my car, started the engine, and pulled away from the house that was no longer ours. Sophia would have to figure out her next move. As for me, I had never been so sure of mine. The next morning, I woke up to silence. It was the first thing I noticed. For 3 years, my mornings had been filled with noise. The sound of Sophia's phone buzzing with notifications from social media, the distant hum of her voice as she ordered overpriced coffee, the clinking of expensive jewelry as she rummaged through her designer closet. But today, nothing. No presence lingering beside me in bed. No perfume filling the air. No entitled demands waiting for me the moment I stepped out of the bedroom. It was just me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over my face before getting up. The mansion felt different now, less like a showroom and more like a home. The carefully curated decor, once chosen solely to impress, now felt meaningless without her constant presence to flaunt it. But I didn't feel loss. I felt relief. Until my phone rang. I reached for it, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. I already knew who it was. I sighed before answering. Sophia. A pause. Then, a sharp exhale. So that's it, she asked. Her voice was low, tense. You're really going to do this? I walked to the window, looking out at the morning skyline. The city stretched out before me. I already did. She let out a hollow laugh, but I could hear the panic behind it. You think you've won, Lucas? She said. You think you can just throw me away like some discarded piece of furniture? I didn't respond, because I knew that wasn't the real issue here. She wasn't calling because she was heartbroken. She was calling because, for the first time in her life, she was powerless. She had spent years carefully crafting her illusion of perfection, manipulating everyone around her into believing she was untouchable. But now, the mask had been ripped away, and she had nothing left to hide behind. You did this to yourself, I said simply. She scoffed. Oh, please. You're acting like I was some kind of villain. Like I was some monster who never cared about you. I stayed silent. Because we both knew the truth. You knew who I was when you married me, she continued, her voice sharp now. You knew what kind of life I wanted. And you were perfectly fine with it, until now. Until you decided to turn into some self-righteous. Until I decided I deserved better? I cut in. She stopped. The silence stretched between us, thick with undeniable truth. Finally, she let out a slow breath. You think you're better than me, Lucas? I thought about that for a moment. No, I said, but I finally realized that I deserve more than you. She inhaled sharply, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. I hung up, and just like that, it was over. The next few days passed in a blur. Sophia had no money, no access to my assets, no home of her own to retreat to. Her mother, Eleanor, had refused to take her back, disgusted by how she had embarrassed the family. Her so-called friends, the ones who had always surrounded her at parties, laughed at her jokes, clung to her in social settings, had vanished the moment they realized she was no longer useful. She had spent her entire life building a kingdom out of smoke and mirrors. And now, she was standing in the ashes. I wasn't sure where she had gone after I left her in that mansion. I didn't ask. I didn't care. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing after someone who never truly saw me. I was moving forward. A week later, I got a call from my lawyer. Divorce papers are ready, he said simply. I closed my eyes, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I had known this was coming, had wanted this, had planned for this. But hearing it out loud, it felt like a final door closing. Like the last thread tying me to the life I once thought I wanted had finally snapped. When do I sign? I asked. Whenever you're ready, he replied. We can move forward immediately, considering the circumstances. Given that she has no claim to your assets, it should be clean. I nodded to myself. Clean. Something my life had never been since the day I said, I do to a woman who had never loved me. I'll come in tomorrow, I said. And with that, I ended the call. That night, I sat in my office, staring at the divorce papers on my desk. The final step. The last thing standing between me and a future that was finally mine again. I picked up a pen, exhaling slowly before signing my name at the bottom. Lucas Bennett. A signature that no longer belonged to Sophia's husband. A name that was finally mine again. I set the pen down, leaning back in my chair. It was done. No regrets. No doubts. No turning back. For years, I had been trapped in a marriage built on manipulation and convenience. In a relationship where I had been nothing more than a wallet in someone else's world. And now, I was free. For the first time in a long time, I could finally say with certainty, I had won. The next morning, I woke up with an unfamiliar feeling. Lightness. There was no weight pressing down on my chest, no underlying tension simmering beneath the surface of my day. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up feeling like I was stepping into a war zone. I stretched, exhaling as the realization settled in. It was over. The papers were signed, the ties had been severed, and Sophia no longer had a claim to me or anything I owned. It was a strange sensation, being truly alone. Not the lonely kind of alone, but the kind where I finally had space to breathe. No forced conversations. No passive-aggressive comments over breakfast. No watching my money disappear into things that had nothing to do with me. Just silence. And for the first time in my life, I didn't hate it. By noon, I had settled into my office, going through emails when my phone rang. I expected it to be my lawyer or a business associate. But when I glanced at the screen, my brows furrowed. Sophia. For a moment, I just stared at the screen. A part of me was tempted to ignore it. I owed her nothing. And yet, a small part of me was curious. What could she possibly want now? With a sigh, I answered. There was silence on the other end for a moment before she spoke. Lucas. Her voice sounded different. Not the smooth, polished confidence I was used to. Not the fake sweetness she used when she wanted something. She sounded tired. I leaned back in my chair. What do you want, Sophia? A sharp inhale. You don't have to sound so distant. She trailed off, and for a brief second, I thought she might be reconsidering her words. But then she sighed. I need your help. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was sharp, disbelieving. She had spent 3 years using me, and now that I had finally cut her off, she had the audacity to ask for my help? That's not going to happen, I said flatly. Lucas, please. Her voice cracked slightly. I don't have anywhere to go. I tapped my fingers against my desk, my expression unreadable. A week ago, I might have felt something. Pity maybe. The urge to fix things. To make it easier for her, even after everything. But not anymore. You had a home, I said coolly. You just never saw it as one. You saw it as a showpiece, a status symbol. And now that it's gone, you suddenly care? She swallowed audibly. You don't understand. No, Sophia, I said, my voice firm. I understand perfectly. She was silent for a moment. And then, she did something I never expected. She cried. Not the fake, manipulative tears she used to get her way. These were real. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I spent my whole life thinking. I thought if I just built the perfect life, if I surrounded myself with the right people, I would be happy. But now, she let out a shaky breath. Now I don't even know who I am without all of it. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have enjoyed hearing her fall apart. But all I felt was emptiness. Because the truth was, I had stopped caring about Sophia long before she realized she had lost me. You'll figure it out, I said simply. Her breath hitched. That's it. That's all you have to say. I rubbed my temple, suddenly exhausted. What do you expect, Sophia? Do you want me to swoop in and save you? Give you another chance? Put you up in a luxury penthouse until you get back on your feet? Silence. Because she knew. That was exactly what she wanted. But I wasn't that man anymore. I exhaled slowly, my voice softer this time. You never saw me, Sophia. You never saw us. And now, you're finally feeling what it's like to be left in the cold. Lucas. I cut her off. Goodbye, Sophia. And then, for the last time, I hung up. That night, I sat on the balcony, a glass of bourbon in hand, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. For the first time in 3 years, my mind was clear. No weight on my shoulders. No anxiety clawing at the edges of my thoughts. Just peace. Sophia would find a way to survive. She always did. But I wasn't going to be part of that journey. She had made her choices. And now, I was making mine. A new beginning. A new life. One without her. A year had passed since I had last spoken to Sophia. 12 months. 365 days since I had hung up that final call, leaving her to figure out her own life for once. And in that time, I had changed. Not in the dramatic, Hollywood movie kind of way. I didn't wake up one day with some grand revelation about love and second chances. I didn't suddenly feel the urge to chase after happiness like a desperate fool. No, I simply learned how to live again. Without her. Without the weight of our past. Without constantly questioning whether I was enough, whether I was doing enough, whether I would ever be seen as more than just a wallet in someone else's world. I had spent the past year rebuilding myself. And it felt damn good. It started with small things. For the first time in years, I actually enjoyed my home. Without Sophia's extravagant touch, without her constant need to impress, the mansion had started to feel like an actual place to live, rather than a showroom. I redecorated, not in some massive, over-the-top way, but in a way that finally made it mine. I got rid of the cold, lifeless furniture she had insisted on. I replaced the expensive but uncomfortable chairs with things I actually liked. I filled the rooms with things that mattered to me, not what would look best on Instagram. I started traveling again, not to show off, but because I actually wanted to see the world. I went on solo trips. I hiked in places I never would have gone with Sophia. I went to cities where no one knew my name, where I didn't have to play the role of the perfect husband in a perfect life that never existed. And in doing all of that, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. Real, unfiltered, uncomplicated freedom. Then, one afternoon, everything came full circle. I was sitting in my favorite cafe, a small, quiet spot in the city that Sophia would have turned her nose up at, when I saw her. Sophia. She was sitting by the window, staring down at a coffee cup with an unreadable expression. I almost didn't recognize her. Her hair, once always perfectly styled, now had a natural wave to it. The expensive designer dresses she used to flaunt were gone, replaced by simple but elegant clothes that actually looked comfortable. And the biggest difference? She was alone. No group of socialites around her. No carefully curated presence. No show to put on. Just her. For a moment, I debated whether or not to walk past without saying anything. I didn't know her a conversation. We had said everything that needed to be said. But then, as if sensing my presence, she looked up. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me. And for the first time in years, there was no smugness, no superiority. Just something softer. Something real. I let out a slow breath before walking over. Mind if I sit? She blinked, caught off guard. No. Sure. I pulled out the chair across from her, settling in. There was a brief silence as we studied each other. Then, She smiled, small, hesitant. You look good. I smirked slightly. So do you. She huffed a quiet laugh, shaking her head. That's a lie, but I'll take it. I glanced at the cup in her hands. Didn't expect to find you here. She exhaled. Yeah, well, a lot has changed. I arched a brow. So I've heard. She looked away, tapping her fingers against the ceramic mug. I guess you know then. I nodded. That your old circle cut you off? That you had to move out of the city? Yeah. She let out a breath, staring down at her coffee. It was rough for a while. I didn't say anything. She let the silence sit for a moment before continuing. I had to learn how to survive on my own, she admitted. Had to get a job. Had to figure out how to live without the money, the connections, the name. I tilted my head. And she let out a small, dry laugh. And it sucked. I chuckled, shaking my head. Yeah, that sounds about right. She sighed, tracing the rim of her cup. But it also made me see things differently. I watched her carefully, waiting. I spent my whole life thinking that success meant being seen. That power meant being admired, feared, envied. But when I lost everything, when I had no one left, I realized that none of it mattered. She looked up at me, her gaze softer than I had ever seen it. And I realized, I never really saw you, Lucas. I inhaled slowly, letting the words settle between us. I know I can't change the past, she said quietly. I know I don't deserve anything from you. But I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they meant something. I could see it in her eyes. This wasn't the old Sophia, the one who played people like chess pieces, who manipulated and controlled. This was someone else. Someone who had finally been humbled by life. And for the first time, I actually believed her. I nodded slowly. Thank you. She swallowed, looking down at her hands. So, are you happy? I thought about that for a moment. Then I smiled. Yeah, I am. She exhaled, a small smile tugging at her lips. Good. You deserve that. I studied her for a long moment. And then, just like that, I stood up. Because this wasn't a reunion. This wasn't unfinished business. This was just closure. You'll be okay, I said simply. She looked up at me, blinking rapidly. And then, after a pause, she nodded. Yeah, she whispered. I think I will. I gave her one last small smile. And then I walked away. Not with regret. Not with resentment. Just peace. Because after everything, I had won. Not by destroying her. Not by getting revenge. But by finally being free of her. And that was enough.